Week 6 of the 2023 college football season is wrapped up, and so today I'll be giving you guys my Week 7 college football rankings. Week 6 of action. Definitely a surprising one. We saw several major upsets this past weekend that have definitely shook things up as we look forward to the midpoint of the regular season. So with that, let's get started. Starting out with 1 through 7, we got new number 1 once again this week. Georgia has bounced back to number 1. I did bump this team down 2 after last week. Of course, a close win against Auburn. And I mean, really in general, the past 3 weeks heading into the Kentucky matchup, just didn't look like the same dominant Georgia team that we're used to seeing. So, and considering how impressive Michigan has looked and a couple other teams as well, Georgia did get bumped down, but they are back up to number 1. This team destroyed Kentucky this past weekend. 51-13 was the final. Kentucky is a good football team. They just blew out Florida the week before, finally got back into the top 25, and Georgia shut that down real quick. So Bulldogs definitely back up to number 1 for me, and definitely still a national favorite. Michigan's number 2. They beat Minnesota 52-10. So destroyed Minnesota this past weekend. Still very much a top 2 team in the country right now, 6-0 on the season. Things for Michigan, we haven't seen this team play a top 25 team yet. That's going to come on down the road, but I mean, for Michigan, still one of the best teams in the country for sure. And I mean, I've got them at number 2. Ohio State, though, is jumping up to number 4. So speak of the Big Ten having 3 Big Ten East teams in the top 6 now. I mean, it's just insane what the Big Ten East is. I mean, you got the East Division, which is probably the best division in college football. Then you got the Big Ten West in comparison that is just a total train wreck. It's quite a it's insane the difference between the two. But Michigan number 2 easily. Ohio State number 4 beat Maryland 37-17. The Buckeyes, I mean, that was a close game for a while there. You kind of had to think in the first half when Maryland was hanging in there, are the Buckeyes going to lose this game to Maryland? I mean, Maryland being a 5-0 team, having a chance to prove who they are. But Ohio State really pulled away in the second half. Nice, impressive win for them. They are 5-0. Washington, though, is right in between at number 3. I do think the Huskies should be ranked higher than where they are. They've got the best offense in the country. I really do believe. You consider how dominant they have been. I mean, especially offensively. Defensively, this team has got some work to do if they want to be a big national contender. But, I mean, as of now, you look at how they've played offensively this season, they are very much deserving of being number 3. And obviously, huge showdown coming up here in Week 7 with Washington and Oregon. Top 7 matchup I've got in my rankings, and it's a top 8 in the AP poll. And definitely the winner of that matchup turns into a very real national contender moving forward. And Florida State's number 5. They beat Virginia Tech 39-17. Dominant win for them. Florida State still remains my top team in the ACC by far. I mean, Louisville is starting to be on the rise for sure. Keep an eye on them. And obviously North Carolina has been great as well. But Florida State still remains that top favorite as of right now. Number 6 is Penn State. They didn't play this past week, but still keep an eye on Penn State. I feel like this is a team that's kind of similar to last season, being overshadowed once again by Michigan and Ohio State. But I feel like Penn State is a team that could very well still win the Big Ten. They're a team that I could really surprise some people down the stretch here in the second half of the season. And I mean, don't be surprised if Penn State makes a run, maybe beats Michigan or Ohio State, and they could be in the playoff this season. They are still in contention for sure. Oregon's number 7 also didn't play this past week, but obviously huge showdown against Washington this upcoming weekend. Number 8 through 14, we got Oklahoma number 8. This team beat Texas 34-30. Huge win for the Sooners. I don't have this team quite inside the top 7 yet. I know that the Sooners are number 5 in the AP poll, but I do think the Sooners are still they're still behind some of those top tier teams in the top 7. I feel like once we figure out who wins Washington, Oregon, and a couple things in the Big Ten, and if OU keeps winning, there's no doubt they'll be continuing to climb. But I mean, I'll say this too: 1 through 8 are insanely close. I think at this point in the season, really, I mean, Oklahoma could be very well a top 4, top 3 team as much as they are number 8 right now. Honestly, I could put Oklahoma at number 3. Just as much as number 8. That's just how close it is. But Sooners a huge win for them, and suddenly the Sooners are emerging as maybe the Big 12 favorite. Texas on the other side, brutal loss for them, but Texas is still a top 10 team. I really do believe. You consider they've got the strongest resume in the country heading into the Oklahoma matchup. They beat Alabama week 2 on the road. They beat Kansas 40-14. Kansas is a good football team, by the way. They had another impressive win this past weekend. And Kansas is one of the top teams in the Big 12, and Texas made it look easy, beating them 40-14. So Longhorns are still a top 10 team, I really do believe, even though a disappointing loss, even though it wasn't even an ugly loss. It was a close one that could definitely have gone either way, but obviously for Texas, a tough blow to their contention hopes, but still keep an eye on them, 5-1 on the season. Alabama's right behind, and the Crimson Tide are starting to click. This team beat Texas A&M 26-20. I know that some counted them out after the loss to Texas in week 2, but Alabama is still a contender. They are very much a live team right now, and they're only getting better as the weeks go on. So Alabama, keep them on your radar as well. USC's number 11. They beat Arizona 43-41, but this was not a pretty win. They went to triple overtime in a home game against Arizona. Arizona's not a bad team, but they are no major standout in the Pac-12. So for USC at this point, their defense has looked terrible the past 3 weeks. And that's a big reason why this team continues to slide in the rankings. I mean, they obviously had that close win against Arizona State a couple of weeks ago, probably the worst team in the Pac-12. And then obviously allowed 41 points to Colorado, which just a sloppy second half there, allowing 41 points to them in the end, and then obviously allowed 41 this past weekend to Arizona. So for USC, their offense is incredible. There's no denying that. It's just, and even their offense had a slow start there against Arizona last night. That was a big reason why that game was so close. So the offense is great. The defense need to be better if the Trojans want to stand out in the Pac-12 and be a college football playoff contender. Ole Miss is number 12, beat Arkansas 27-20. I still feel like Ole Miss is a really talented team, 5-1 on the season. One of the best one-loss teams in the country for sure. North Carolina's number 13, beat Syracuse 40-7. Keep an eye on the Tar Heels. This team is 5-0. I mean, they've in general looked really good this season, and still very much an ACC contender along with Florida State and Louisville, who's right behind. Louisville is suddenly a big-time ACC contender. This team beat Notre Dame this past week 33-20. Just an insane win for the Cardinals. This team is, I mean, they were 5-0 heading into the week, but didn't really have any impressive wins so far this season. But, yeah, they got a massive win in week 6 beating Notre Dame, and in convincing fashion as well, beating them 33-20. 15-21, LSU's number 15 beat Missouri 49-39. A close matchup, and defensively allowed a lot of points there, but LSU is still a good football team. I know this team is a 2-loss football team at this point in the season, and that's why this team isn't ranked super high, but I've still got them in the top 15. I still feel like they're very talented, a team with a high ceiling, and at this point, with how competitive it is from like 15 to even probably down to 25 at this point, I feel like LSU is just a better team in comparison to a lot of these teams outside of the top 15. I mean, I will say this too. I mean, if you look at the top 25, you got your top 11 or 12 that are extremely close. I'd say top 11 at this point in the season, going down to probably Alabama or so in the AP poll. And then there's a bit of a gap from like 11 to 15, and then from 15 downward, all of the teams are probably not big contenders this season. There's just a big talent gap in the top 25, somewhere in the middle. But, I mean, at the top, you got a lot of elite teams, and it's really competitive from like 15 to 25. But Tennessee not far behind at number 16. This team moving up 4 positions in their bye week just because of the amount of losses that we saw towards the bottom of the rankings this week. But Tennessee's still a team to keep an eye on. Very much one of the best teams in the SEC, I do believe. Oregon State's number 17. I am a bit conservative on this team right now just because they allowed 40 points to Cal. I mean, the Pac-12 is filled with incredible offenses, but, I mean, Oregon State also, I mean, they did also just allow only 7 points to Utah, but 40 to Cal is definitely something that should be fixed. I mean, Cal is just not a very good football team, so for Oregon State, still a solid team for sure, but a little bit conservative on them for now. Notre Dame's number 18. They obviously suffered that bad loss to Louisville, 5-2 on the season now. I mean, for Notre Dame, that's just a really tough stretch for them. You consider the Ohio State game, then having to go on the road to Duke, and then on the road to Louisville. All 3 really solid teams, and it finally caught up to them, losing to Louisville 20-33. So for Notre Dame at this point, that's definitely the worst loss on the season. That really takes them out of national contention at this point. But still, there's a lot to play for a team that I think is really talented in Notre Dame. Duke and Utah are 19 and 20. Both teams did not play this past weekend, but both moving up 5. I do think Duke is still a really solid ACC team. Utah at this point, I said this last week, until their offense gets it figured out, especially with Cam Rising and the injuries and stuff, I feel like Utah is just, offensively, they just don't match up with a lot of teams in the Pac-12. And, only scored 7 points against Oregon State and scored 14. Still beat UCLA the week before, but offensively, they just have not been impressive this season. So, but if Cam Rising can come back and play at a high level, Utah is still a team to definitely keep an eye on. UCLA is number 21. They're just behind Utah because they did lose to them, but a really impressive win over Washington State this past weekend, 25-17. So UCLA is back in the rankings, 4-1 overall at this point in the season. 22 through 25, Washington State lost to UCLA, obviously just mentioned, 17-25, but I still like the Cougars a lot, 4-1 on the season. Really disappointing loss there, but they've still got a really great offense and a team that, the Pac-12 has been stacked with teams all season. It's arguably the best conference in college football. You'd probably say the SEC is slightly better, but it's definitely at least the second. And so for Wazoo to kind of come from outside the radar and be a dark horse in the conference has been impressive, but obviously a disappointing loss this past weekend. Kansas, number 23, beat UCF 55-22. Really impressive win for the Jayhawks. This team continues to be a very impressive football team. Kansas is usually atrocious when it comes to football, but not this season or last season. And this is a better team than we saw last year. I feel like Kansas is a legit contender in the Big 12. The Big 12's got, now that Kansas State has lost a couple of, they just lost Oklahoma State, probably a team that they definitely shouldn't have lost to. But your big three in the Big 12, you got Oklahoma and Texas, two of your all-time blue blood powers. And then you got Kansas as another one of those top teams in the Big 12. Probably your number 3 in the conference. Just insane what Kansas is doing. Really keep an eye on them. I know they lost to Texas pretty bad a couple weeks ago, but still Jayhawks are a talented team, true dark horse in the Big 12. And then Missouri, number 24, they lost to LSU 39-49, but wasn't a terribly disappointing loss. They really hung in there and put up a great fight. And first loss of the season for Mizzou, and they're still in the top 25 at 5-1. Kentucky's number 25. Lost to Georgia 13-51, just an ugly loss for the Wildcats and really a disappointment as well. I thought, honestly, Kentucky would be able to put up a fight there, keep it close, especially with how Georgia hasn't been super dominant this season. But it turned out to be a pretty brutal loss. And, despite the 13-51 final score, I still got this team in the top 25 based on how impressive they've been so far this season, still being a 5-1 football team. First 5 out, Miami, Wisconsin, Wyoming, Tulane, and Maryland. Miami is just outside the Hurricanes, an all-time collapse in Week 6. You can't lose in the way that they did. You just take a knee and you win the game against Georgia Tech. A nice win. You're 5-0 on the season, but it turned out to be an all-time collapse that will be remembered for a long, long time. So for the Hurricanes, that mistake is going to jump them from 15 to 26 in my rankings. You just can't have that and still be a ranked football team. Wisconsin, 27, probably the best team in the Big Ten West. Badgers are halfway decent football team starting to emerge as well. Wyoming, nice win over Fresno State this past weekend. They're 5-1 on the season. And then Tulane still in the background. Maryland kept it close against Ohio State for a while, so at least give them a mention. But with that, that's going to wrap it up for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on these Week 7 rankings, your thoughts and everything. Drop them in the comments, and stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.